Hi, Nash. Hi, Mariya.
Hey, coffee, cheers.
Cheers.
So thank you for being here today. I am really excited. What do you want to tell me about?
Ooh, I want to talk about neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity. What? Give me a little elevator pitch. What is it?
Oh God, neuroplasticity is the changes that happen in our brain when we learn things or when we forget things.
So changes to a brain, it's like our brain is plastic and flexible, and it can change with every new experience, whether it's walking, thinking, playing an instrument. Does it mean these changes are physical somehow to the brain? Like, can you notice them with an instrument?
Okay, that's a great question. So we have temporary changes and we have permanent changes sometimes. So whatever happens at the beginning is temporary. So for example, today I learned 2 words in Spanish. And then tomorrow, if I don't repeat it, I forget those 2 words, right? But if I forget those words and then I learn new words and then I keep going on, I can learn in Spanish. So my brain changes permanently and I can speak Spanish. But there are different ways scientifically how our brain changes itself. Do you want me to talk about those?
Yeah, I know you mentioned before there are 3 main mechanisms, right?
Yes,
Can you give me a little description of each?
So before talking about neuroplasticity, I need to talk about synapses and how our brain has neurons. So neurons are little cells in our brain that they communicate with each other, and through their communication we move, we talk, we think, and all of that, right? This communication can get strengthened or weakened based on what we do with our brain. So imagine again the Spanish language thing. So if I'm repeating those words, some neurons talk to each other a lot. So because they talk to each other a lot, they strengthen their connection. So their synapse or the connection between them gets stronger. So that is a change in synapse that we call neuroplasticity. Now, those changes can happen in different ways when we look at the big picture. In the big picture, one of the mechanisms is unmasking. So imagine some of the neurons in the brain, they already are organized in a specific way to do something. They can also do other things, but those other things are inhibited. For example, I feel my face in a specific part of my brain, and that's what that specific part of my brain does. I feel my fingers in the brain part very close to that part of my face. So imagine somehow there is no sensory information going from my hand. For example, someone that has amputation. So now the area that represents the hand, now it's not getting any information from the hand. So the area that gets information from the face invades that area that used to feel the hand. So now that area that used to feel the hand now feels the face. So if I touch someone in their face, they might feel that they have a hand. So that's one of the mechanisms that can explain phantom pain with people that have amputations.
Okay.
That can happen in hours or days very quickly. So it doesn't need a structural changes or functional changes. It just happens with unmasking something that already exists. The other way of changes in the brain that happens is functional changes. For example, someone that learns how to play music, you have to learn how to bring in several sensory information together and bring several motor output together at the same time and organize them in a way that you can play music.
So that's a functional change.
So that's a functional change. Okay. The functional change also happens with replacement of some areas that are doing something else, but now they can do something else. For example, someone that is blind reads Braille. And Braille, the way you touch it, you feel it in the sensory area of touch. But then people who read Braille, the process actually happens in the back of the brain that is in charge of vision. So that area of the brain that used to process vision now process Braille reading, which is a huge functional change in people with lack of vision.
Can I ask, how is this different than unmasking? It almost sounded similar.
Unmasking happens very quickly, and it's not the most functional thing to happen. It's a temporary change and it's not really functional. Sometimes it's functional, it can be helpful, but for strengthening, we need functional changes. So we need networks to communicate in the right way.
And so this both you mentioned, they're not changes physically in any structures, right?
Okay, so that's a good question, because the next step in neuroplasticity is the structural changes. So if you repeat learning or repeat unlearning or repeat repairing from some impairment, repeating and repeating and repeating makes changes the structural and permanent. So by that I mean that your cells start changing. So they branch out to communicate better, they change their structure in the synapses, so the synapses become stronger. And sometimes if these changes are so huge and in a huge amount of time, for example, a musician that starts under 4-year-old and plays music for 15 or 20 years, there are parts of their brain that in the gray matter, they can have a little bit of thickening that can be detected by MRI.
When you first talked about neuroplasticity to me, I kind of kept imagining that, okay, anything we learn to do, say, think, anything new has some kind of a physical imprint on the brain. That's not necessarily true. The structural change is the one I kept imagining, right? The other two you mentioned
they can be more temporary. They can be more of things that already are there. So it's more like a functional change. But the structural change comes with repetition. That's the key word in neuroplasticity, repetition.
So when you're talking about short-term and long-term neuroplasticity, sounds like short-term is not so much physical as long-term, where you can actually then detect it in the thickness in certain areas. It's not like your brain gets bigger or heavier, which is what I used to think, but you can detect it on small scale, like you know it's there.
In small scale of neurons, in the synapses where neurons are communicating, actually structural changes happen.
And neuroplasticity actually depends on your age, right?
Okay, neuroplasticity is age dependent or time dependent. So, for example, you have to learn certain things in a certain age, otherwise it would become very difficult or impossible to learn it in older age.
So when I was growing up, my parents really forced me to study English, which I'm really grateful for, because now I get to live here and speak to Nash from Iran, you know, because we have something in common, a common language.
Yeah.
But you have to learn it early, right? And they kept saying before 9 years old is easier. There's something true to that,
that's the effect of time on neuroplasticity. If you learn a language before 3-year-old, you're fluent as a native. But then when you get older, the plasticity of your brain decreases. So you will have an accent if you learn a language later than 12-year-old.
Yeah.
And hey, let me tell you this. So at the beginning, when you learn a skill or even like try to do some weight training or whatever you're doing, you feel like, oh, I'm stronger after a week, right?
Yeah.
But that strength comes from the networks of your brain that communicate better with your muscles. It doesn't come from your muscle fibers, actually. But after months that your muscle fibers keep getting stimulated and they actually build up, then you have a strength in your muscle for real.
Oh, it's so fascinating. Naj, what would you like to learn more about?
I love to learn about networks in computers. So,
Okay, how come?
because, you know, brain works based on networks, meaning like a population of neurons that collaborate functionally. We are born with certain number of neurons. So the number of neurons doesn't change as much. We have some little areas in the brain that they create new neurons, but it's really, really little. So we are mostly the same. We have the same brain and number of neurons as we were born. We actually have less because we are born with more neurons and then they die off. But then we have way more networking. So our neurons connect with each other, and that's how we learn new things.
So the hardware is all the same. It's the software that
there you
keeps
go.
updating.
Yes,
Oh my
yes. That's exactly what it is. So I want to learn about that.
Okay, well, this has been a really fantastic discussion, guys. Believe me, this is 10 minutes, but we talked for about 2 hours.
More.
Cheers to healthy body and mind, I guess.
Oh.
На здоровье.
Salamati.